Welcome back to another UNC basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're checking us out on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me is our basketball recruiting analyst, David Sisk, who also will talk to us all basketball season about the actual Tar Heels themselves, former AAU and college coach. So David knows everything going on in the basketball world. And today, big news, David. The NCAA went ahead and released its guidelines for a schedule this year. We now know when the schedule will start, how many games everybody can play, and some of the other protocols. So November 25th, that's the start of college basketball. 27-game maximum, a maximum of 4 non-conference games. So maybe that means a 23-game ACC schedule, which will be crazy. We're talking bubbles for a while. A lot of stuff still not totally finalized, but your initial thoughts seeing what the NCAA has put out today?
Kind of what we thought. I spoke to a college coach, not a head coach, but a staff member of a Power 5 school Sunday night who's in charge of setting his team's schedule. And his words were, we're on pins and needles waiting on the announcement of when it can start. And the reason is, at that time, they had an idea, and this November date, late November, was one that I think most people thought would happen. But they wanted to know for sure. That way they can start the scheduling. There is no way. It's like the college football schedule where you come out a few weeks before the season starts, and SEC's playing 10 games, and I think the ACC's playing 11, and SEC's going to be all conference games, and that's going to be like what it is here. So it's going to be interesting. How many conference games do you play? Could it be where you're quarantined and you're playing schools from other Power 5 conferences? I think the thing that we will see is there's going to be few, if any, ACC schools playing or SEC or Big Ten or what have you, playing mid-major and low-major schools. I spoke with a friend of mine who's on a coaching staff in the Big Ten back in probably August, and he told me at that time, look, all our protocols and the hoops that we jump through, you wouldn't believe, to make sure our players don't have any risk. We've got the money behind it. We've got a big staff behind it. We've got the ability to go through with this. And we're not going to play a smaller school, no knock to them, but who does not have the capability to do that. And he never went in to say, okay, we're going to play all Big Ten or whatever, but what have you. Kind of made me sound at that time like you might not even have conferences, like you might put a bunch of Power 5s in one place and they play each other. So, we don't know what the schedule is going to be yet, but those might give you some things to look for of what the possibilities are.
Well, so 27 games, they say 4 non-conference maximum. So it looks like, I guess, there will be conference play. And I don't even want to think about what an NCAA tournament may look like right now. They just got to get to November 25th and then start playing these games. From people I've talked to, and some stuff I've read from some of the journalists that have been on top of this, it looks like we're talking bubbles for a while. Certainly the non-conference games, maybe round robin stuff. I know there was some talk about moving the Maui Invitational, which Carolina's part of, moving it to a casino on a reservation outside of Asheville or possibly even Indianapolis.
That would be.
It sounds to me like that's not going to happen.
That would be Cherokee, North Carolina, Andrew.
Cherokee, North Carolina.
And I just had a conversation with my pastor, who's from Charleston, South Carolina, by the way. We live in Middle Tennessee, outside of Nashville, and we just laughed that we may be the only 2 people in Middle Tennessee who have been to Frontierland in Cherokee, North Carolina. And yes, there was a Cherokee, North Carolina before the Harris Casino. So we need to – I thought about we need to rename this podcast maybe 2 old guys talking about the good old days, you know?
Yeah, that might be. Tell you what, if they end up having a Maui there, I'll just get you credentialed to cover it because I'll probably have to cover football. So we'll have everything taken care of. And it could be a blast from your past.
Hey, that's awesome. That sounds good to me. And I can see them doing that because kind of think about the preseason, I call them preseason events, but you have the Maui Classic and you have Las Vegas, Orlando, all over the place. You have the one in the Bahamas. And if you think about it, that one is in the hotel. So they take these ballrooms, which are huge, and you've got these high ceilings anyway. And then you can put a basketball court and bleachers in there on that thing, and you can put a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand people in those big ones. So I've never been in Harris Casino actually in Cherokee, but I could see maybe getting even more than one ballroom depending on what they have, and just basically renting out that whole casino for a certain period of time and having, you can have a couple of games going on at one time.
Be like AAU.
If you have 3 or 4 different rooms, let's say, and you could have 3 or 4 courts going on at one time, you could get a lot of games played through the day. And
I can't believe we're talking about this. It's amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, and that's the new thing. But, you go back to the old thing. I actually did have a little bit of time today when I got home from work. And I saw maybe the news was breaking on this, and I saw the date, and I hadn't seen the actual story at that time. I went back and looked at some old North Carolina schedules, University of North Carolina schedules. And if you take the 82 team that won the national championship, what would you say the date was on their first game?
Thanksgiving weekend is when college basketball used to start. The preseason NIT. Yeah, remember the preseason NIT that used to be a big deal?
Yeah.
That started a week earlier, and they played their semifinals the night before Thanksgiving and the finals the day after. I covered it in New York in 2002 when McCants and May and Felton were freshmen, and I spent Thanksgiving in New York up there by myself covering that. Wednesday and Friday, and Thursday was Thanksgiving. That's when college basketball used to start a long time ago. I actually thought of that a while ago too when I saw that date. I think it starts too early now. Last year was November 8th or 9th. That's way too early.
Coach Smith's second national championship team actually started, the first game was on December 1st. They didn't play a game in November.
Yeah.
And still played 34 games, I think.
Yeah.
So you may be getting back a little bit to the way it used to be. And I've always thought, last year, probably one of the biggest jokes to me in college sports, last year, if you'll remember, Miami and Florida played the college football game on a Saturday night a week before anybody else played. They basically played in July. Yeah. And they probably had 2 or 3 days of practice.
And it was a horrible game.
Quality of football you've ever seen. But they keep moving all this up. So now you're playing. They went from before, games before Labor Day you didn't have. Before Labor Day weekend. Now they start moving it up that last week of August. So that wasn't enough. Now they have to put it the 3rd week in August. And, basketball now you're starting November 5th, November 6th, you go and go into professional sports now. The Major League Baseball starting in March.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
I hate that.
And so you've got the let's say you've got the Orioles playing the Red Sox in Boston on March the 26th. That's
blasphemy in my world, man.
I'd love to be on top of the Green Monster in that one, about 20 degrees and a wind, about 25 mile an hour wind coming off.
October 14th to start a practice. I remember when October 15th used to be a huge day to big-time college basketball fans.
Yeah.
That used to be the Midnight Madness, October 15th. That's when practice would start.
And,
so it's a blast for the past for some of us older guys.
Yeah.
But as far as getting this thing done, if let's say for the sake of discussion, David, let's say everybody plays, all the conferences play, they figure out a way to make it work, and at the end of the year, we're so much further ahead with the COVID, and we can have, again, for the sake of discussion, we have a normal NCAA tournament where it's seeded the way it's always been seeded. I would say that the ACC and the Big Ten and the SEC and Big 12, maybe the Pac-12, I guess I got to include them, they will have a huge advantage because they will have been playing almost exclusively teams from their conference. They'll be so ready. They're always ready anyway. But
And
those
if the
mid-majors,
schedule, will they move the needle on how they evaluate these teams when they make these
yeah.
decisions? Because
But also the mid-majors
the
won't get
schedule's
to
going
play
to
them.
be lopsided, buddy.
They're going to be teams playing in the NCAA tournament, winning some of these other leagues. They're decent teams, but they have no idea who they are in a sense because they hadn't yet faced one of those clubs. They'll do it for the first time on that stage. I would think that, and I promised we wouldn't look at the NCAA tournament, but here I am doing it already. I would think that this would be a situation where we maybe wouldn't see as many upsets.
Yeah, and that could be, but who knows how that's going to happen and how that's going to play out. I mean, there's just so much uncertainty now. I'll tell you one thing that does kind of leap off the charts at me, and we can look at it now because they're saying that teams may, and I'm reading this off from your report, teams may partake in conditioning, sports-related meetings, and skill instruction for up to 12 hours per week. That bothers me a little bit because, and I understand, you have your limits in doing it, but I always thought the one thing that worked against college basketball on keeping players from going pro was they were only allowed 20 hours per week in a gym. And, there's a lot of times in the summer they're not allowed to get around the coach, and I never understood that if you're going to work out. Whereas you can go pro and you can get all the time in a world that you want to with workouts. So 12 hours per week, that's less than 2 hours a day. And that bothers me as far as, and a lot of that's conditioning and other things. So your skill development, I just think you owe it to the players that they can get with a coach or somebody, in that program and just get more time to improve their skill and improve their game. And I know right now that's just a Band-Aid and that's not how it's going to be. But one thing I've always said, they asked John Lucas one time about coaching college basketball. And he said, we'd be on probation the first day I took the job. And they said, why, would you cheat? And he said, no. He said, I'm not practicing just 20 hours or get my players just 20 hours a week. We'd do 20 hours the first 3-4 days. And if you want your players to get better, there was a reason Jerry Tarkanian you remember when they got put on probation? What did they get put on probation for? And what did he get fired for, rather, if you remember? Remember they had the cameras up in the ceiling and they were doing the conditioning and practice, outside of when they were supposed to do it? He knew what it took. And I'm sorry. I'm all for, these guys, you owe it to your guys. You are not doing them a favor by working less.
Yeah, I agree. They're there, so why not let them participate? If the objective is to get to a season and everybody be healthy, then why not get them into that regiment now and keep them? You don't have to drive them. The coach doesn't have to grind these kids right now like he will in November getting ready for the season. But to limit the amount of time they could spend together, they could spend in the group and the organization that's going to best take care of them doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes in what's supposed to be best interest for the kids, I think we overprotect a lot of times.
I think people make rules because they feel like they have to do something. And a perfect example is here I'm in the press box the other day. There are only a handful of us allowed in the press box. Unfortunately, so many my great peers are not up there, and it's really unfortunate, but it is the time that we're in right now. And the opening the coin toss right before the game, and Chas Surratt walks out there, and a guy from Syracuse walks out there. There's just one guy on each team. Typically, there would be 4. But, oh, no, you can't have 4 guys from each team out there for the coin toss because it's not safe. Yet 5 minutes later, they're banging heads and they're spitting and sweating and snot going out all over each other, blood and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes people make too many rules. And I think this 12-hour thing is a perfect example of that because Roy Williams and his staff know how to take care of those guys better. It's a better situation for them than if they're left with all this time to themselves that is not monitored the way it needs to be, especially in this day and age, especially with what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, and you hear them say all the time that players are probably a lot safer, with their programs on campus, than there are going back home.
Carolina, just so people, we knew 30 of the 32 games that would have been on the schedule had none of this craziness ever happened. So the games that are probably lost, they had a road game at Hawaii they were going to play before the Maui Invitational. They're obviously not going to play that. They had scheduled a game at Monmouth, which is coached by King Rice, former Tar Heel, and J.R. Reed's also on that staff. They were going to play that a couple days before playing Ohio State in Brooklyn as part of the CBS Sports Classic, which they've played in the last 6 years, I guess. I doubt that's going to be played. The ACC Big Ten Challenge, unless they stick them all in a bubble somewhere, it's hard to imagine that being played this year. And the Tar Heels also had home games scheduled versus Elon, UNC Wilmington, and Charleston. Again, we don't know what's going to happen with all that stuff, but I would imagine just like in football, Carolina fans spent so much time focusing on opening up at Central Florida, then playing Auburn and Atlanta, and what a cool thing that was. But you could probably, prepare yourself for something very, very different than what you're thinking right now. That's probably going to be what the schedule is. It could be a situation where they spend a couple weeks somewhere and they play a round robin with the teams that are there. And it could be, as far as conference play goes, and I've heard this from some pretty smart people, that the first leg of conference play could be played in some kind of bubble or multiple bubbles as well in mid and late December before they get into January. Because if you wait until January to play conference games and you play 23 conference games, that's going to be very, very challenging. So there's still some stuff to be settled on this, David. And all bets are off. I hate the trite 2020 stuff, but man, it keeps creeping back up, doesn't it?
And when you look at this North Carolina team, I was going to ask you if you remember a team that was so just heavy laden with freshmen. And we're doing scouting reports one per week on incoming freshmen, and there's going to be maybe all six, but that have a big say in this team's success. And what happens is they don't have time to grow up. And I think when you have all these freshmen playing Monmouth, playing Elon, playing College of Charleston, it allows those players to get seasoned a little bit, learn the speed of the college game, toughen up for it, see what it is to be a college basketball player before you hit the meat grinder that's the ACC. And you also have some tough non-conference games early on. But now, you could just say, hey, we got a bunch of freshmen and we're throwing you right out there in it, sink or swim, against what could be a totally 100% Power 5 schedule.
The last time they were this reliant on freshmen, I would say would be 2005, 2006 season, the year after Roy won his first title. Hansbrough was a freshman. Bobby Frazier started at point guard as a freshman that year. Ginyard started a lot that year. And in that club season opener, they hosted Gardner-Webb, and they beat them on a David Noel jump shot at the buzzer.
And I'll say this, though. It's easy to say right now. We've heard it a lot. We hear it in the NFL. The teams with the least amount of turnover and the most familiarity is probably going to be your best teams. Your coaches come back, your quarterback comes back, your offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator come back. Most of your players are back, rather than making all these additions. Tampa Bay, New Orleans, for example. Yeah. Tom Brady, you pick up Fournette, you pick up Gronkowski. So it's a new look, and they're going to get better. But I'll say this about North Carolina. It may start – I'm not going to say it would start out rocky, but, there's going to be a learning curve and when what goes with that. But if you're playing this night in and night out, you're playing those type of teams, the team could grow quicker than what they normally would. Now, the record early on might not indicate it, but toward the end of the year, and we don't know when that is. I'm not going to say late February, March. I'm not going to put it that way. But by the end of the year, this team could have grown up a lot quicker and be better than maybe they normally would have. So I think there's a little bit of a rainbow in it.
Well, I've said this before. You're looking at a situation where it's likely a true freshman point guard, will be a true freshman point guard. And 2 years ago, Kobe White was, in the process of passing by Seventh Woods and taking over that spot. But it wasn't until the Kentucky game in Chicago, which was right before Christmas, when I think it really started to click for him, and I think that was the 11th or 12th game of the season. And it's going to have to be a lot quicker now. They can't, if they're going to be playing either Power 5 or close to Power 5 caliber competition right out of the gate, nothing but, that situation is going to have to get straightened out and has to work for them very, very quickly, or it could cost them dearly. Now, in the other scenario, and again, we're going NCAA tournament here, but we're kind of looking at the season. If a lot of just power conferences play and some of the smaller ones can't, which I think is something a lot of people are also whispering about right now because of the concerns of testing. You kind of alluded to it earlier. And if there is some kind of a postseason tournament that only involves Power 5 teams, it'll be very interesting to see how they weigh what you do in the regular season. Kind of might be like the NBA where you could go 40-42, but you're the 8th seed, so you're the 8th seed and you go in. It'll be interesting to see what kind of winning percentage a lot of teams that get into a postseason tournament if all they're doing is playing Power 5 teams. Either they're going to be judged to jilt solely against each other, or if they're going to look at some of the lesser conferences, the smaller conferences that are also playing. Of course, these are all giant question marks that we're discussing, but these are things that have to be sorted out.
Yeah, and, there was a big deal made when you came back from the bubble in the NBA, or came back to the bubble after the time down. Phoenix went undefeated and didn't get in, because they were so bad early on. But, man, I think they ended up like 8-0 when it came back. But, you had teams probably up at the top of the West are really hoping it was the Memphis Grizzlies instead of Portland. And Portland had to come back from behind, but you could just see teams like you say, you really get some imbalance where you get some teams seated low that may not I used to hear Kenny Smith say all the time, he said, Portland, they're an 8 seed, but they're really a 3. So, you could run into some of that.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see. Practice starts October 14th, first game November 25th. We have absolutely no idea who North Carolina's going to play. We have no idea who anybody's going to play. We don't even know if the Carolina-Duke games are going to be in the Dean Dome or Cameron Indoor Stadium this year. There is so much still to be determined, and we will, of course, hop back on here and discuss those things as we learn them. Man, this is a crazy time, David.
If you do let me go to Cherokee, do I get a voucher for a casino?
No comment. I'm not putting that out there on public airways, my friend. He's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. We've been talking UNC basketball and ACC basketball and NCAA basketball and the craziness that is currently going on in everyone's lives. Thanks for stopping by.